Good morning. Allow me to apologize in advance since I watched an old program according to which I was supposed to have a welcoming speech. But a welcoming speech after these two presentations that we've just heard would make no sense. But what I was supposed to talk about was meant in the sense of starting point for further discussion, but let me stay with my welcoming speech. But this is always an important question. What's the importance and the meaning of introductory speeches? Very often we have somebody who doesn't know much and is telling something to people who actually know a lot about a given topic. And the participants who are the victims of such introductory speeches usually tackle the matter in the following way. They do not listen, they sleep through the speech, especially because the speech is supposed to be such that nobody agrees. In other words, everybody agrees. And of course, if everybody agrees, only two things are obvious. You either said nothing or everybody slept through your speech. In order to prevent my speech from being such that will cause you to fall asleep, a good introductory speech should have another characteristic, a good introduction and a good ending, and not much in between. So, in order to ensure that not everybody will agree with what I'll say, let me say at least the following. The idea about the universal basic income actually is not so new in our country. In a way, it is something that in communism was called everybody should be given as much as they need, everybody should contribute as much as they can. In other words, we can say that this is something that we knew already in the marketing model, the way it occurred after the Second World War in Europe. Within the social issues context, we are talking about something that everybody is entitled to having, and this is also present in our pension system when the right to receive pension is awarded with age, certain age, regardless of the work, as well as the child allowance was also a form of universal basic income. If you ask me, we also have a certain form of it with privatization, by which overnight all the citizens of Slovenia turned into capitalists. But unfortunately, this ended up not being the best solution. So this is where we come to some issues and questions. As a professor, I believe that it is always a duty of a professor to doubt everything that everybody else believes in. This is the basic duty on our behalf. So these are the questions. Could the world afford to have a universal basic income? Probably yes, economically. Could Slovenia afford to have UBI? Well, the answer would again be yes. So time and time again it would be yes. And then there are two further questions. Would the universal basic income supplement for different social transfers that we have now, or would this be something we add to the transfers we already have? If it's something to add, then the question would be where the money would come from. If it's a replacement, then we have to ask the question, what are those goods that we believe are more necessary than some others? In that respect, certain norms were set up, occurring throughout history, which are the result of different value judgments, and these value judgments depend on history. Within Europe, the question what is public and what is left for the market is very varied. On one hand, we have Sweden, where the public sector with all the transfers reaches 56%. On the other hand of Europe, on the other side of Europe, also within the EU, until not too long ago, we had Ireland, where the public sector amounted to 30%, and then the Baltic states Baltic states with 30%. Where would one prefer to live is a matter of personal evaluation. When people consider where they would live if they had a choice. So the prevalent ideology at the moment within which the universal basic income appears to be present is completely different. Everything has to be privatized because the public sector is inefficient and the private sector is efficient. These days, there is a general belief in Europe that the public sector is to blame for the crisis, which is a stupidity. The crisis was not caused by the public sector. The public sector was transferred to the money. Private financial sector caused the crisis, and these huge debts of the states occurred because the countries had to resolve and save the banking system. They had to save it, and they had no other way out. And now we look at every single point where to shrink the public sector. We look for the solution in shrinking the public sector, which is completely a nonsense. And that is why we probably need to discuss the things that are now coming to be, whereby I don't mean that it is good to just follow one direction. We have to discuss different questions. Without a doubt, universal basic income can be introduced, but the question is whether politically this is possible to introduce at this time. So it is a rather political and moral question, similarly to the question that we've been discussing, whether the pensioners in the year 2050 will destroy our fiscal system. This is a total stupidity. I personally am not too extremely interested in 2050. Nevertheless, the pensions and the pension system is not so much an economic question rather than a moral one. We are simply talking about the duty of children to support the elderly. But it was transferred from the family where it was good or bad. If you read Kersnik books, you understand that this was now transferred to the state. So the pensions in 50 years' time will not depend on what we're paying into the system. They will depend on the value judgments that will be present in the world in the future and have nothing to do with the time now. So now, since I did not prepare my speech, let me refer to what the previous speakers said in the speeches and presentations that I was completely excited about. It was wonderful. The introduction of UBI at the European level, to begin with. I believe that this is possible, and I do believe that the only source is the value-added tax. We can't interfere with the income. It is very difficult, though, to assess whether the European countries that are in dispute about 1% of GDP that go into the central point, whether they will accept the idea that some 6% of GDP would end up in the centralized point, and we would get it if we divide, for example, the value-added tax, and half would go into the center and the rest would remain in individual states. So the future of the European Union is in this very idea that people are equalized and equal. So if in the future the EU, looking at the convergence of the crisis, and if divergence continue, the existence of the European Union is under question to begin with. So this is the very first question one needs to find answers to. And the second speaker, Professor Standing, I believe, provided us with the best definition of the current global economic crisis, to my mind. The global economic crisis did not occur in 2008. It was developing throughout the period of 20, 30 years with a redistribution of income in the capital and for the benefit of capital and for the detriment of the work. And this, I believe, are the questions that we should talk about in the course of this conference. So this conference makes no sense if we all know to begin with what is right. The conference will make sense if we quarrel on the way and end up agreeing.